Earlier today, the Secret Service gave our studio a call. Did you know that? And they said, all right, is that Laporte guy going to be here? And we said, no. And they said, okay, then the chairman of the FCC will be here any minute now. We actually had a great time. I'll tell you a little bit about my impressions of him. Right. But let's take a look at the interview. We did this about 11 o'clock this morning.
Because I believe they changed before and after the interview.
Who does?
The impressions.
Oh, no. Well, let's go. No, they didn't. I like him a lot. He's a nice guy. Michael Powell.
Guy.
Take a look.
It's a good interview.
Yeah. Chairman of the FCC, Michael Powell, we welcome you to the Screensavers.
Great. Good to be here.
It's great to have you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
What brings you to the Bay Area?
Learning. You know, one of the things we've realized is that, you know, as you try to administer the regulatory side of the technology revolution, you know, you really need to come out here and see what companies are doing, see what the hot technologies are, and see what the trends are, so that hopefully we're a partnership to that, we're relevant to that, as opposed to being an obstacle to that.
You've, in the years that you've now been chairman of the FCC, kind of become in the forefront of all of this. You're in the hot seat now.
You know, absolutely. We've had the rare privilege of stewarding the FCC for 6 years through both the boom and the bust, and hopefully what I think is the recovery. And in that period, if you think about the technological changes we've seen, it's truly revolutionary. I think it's going to change people's lives.
What's the biggest change since you started?
Oh, I think that the enormous migration to internet-based communication systems. More and more you're going to see that all forms of communication are just applications that ride on IP networks, and that's a revolutionary change from the way we've approached the standard telephone company with a big circuit switch in the middle. So that's a huge change.
What parts of the internet does the FCC regulate?
Well, you know, it's interesting. We like to say we don't regulate the internet, but the truth is we do, because we regulate all the infrastructure on which it rides. You know, the rails, the lines, the long haul, the fiber.
All the phone stuff.
You know, all the phone stuff, all the cable stuff, by the way, as Cable Modem is the leading provider of high-speed broadband service. So, you know, the decisions we make about how that's regulated or what the relationship is to software, the applications on that platform, has really long-term implications for the internet itself, and so we take that very seriously.
Do you see the internet? How do you see the internet? Is it a content delivery mechanism? Is it, as some people say, the commons for people to join in together and talk about things? What role do you see the internet playing?
Well, I think it's all of those things, right? I mean, I think one of the enormous values of the internet as compared to the telephone system is you have this enormous global network that really is not owned by a central provider. It is not centralized, which means that all the end users have the ability to distribute product and innovate and create and deliver without having to worry about having an IT contract with a big phone company or something. You have the ability to put product into the system, and I think it's that. The thing that excites me most about it is it's an innovation platform. You know, what's the hottest innovation you've seen in the telephone system? Star 69, you know, something.
We're still dial tone, still the big thing, you know.
But when you take an infrastructure that separates applications and softwares from transport, it means that people can really paint on that palette and create things that have never been created for. You know, we suddenly have access to every innovator in the world, and I think that's what's exciting. Consumers are going to be delivered really synergistically new products, things that do things differently, that really change their lives, as opposed to dumb devices at the end of a network.
It puts you as a regulator, though, in a difficult position, because, well, of course you want to encourage innovation, but at the same time you need to regulate it in some ways. How do you balance the two?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing you do is, in my opinion, when you're talking about revolutionary new technology, you should start from the bottom up. This is not a telephone company. Let's not act like it's Verizon or SBC and fight our way down to what the right regulatory environment. Let's treat it as virgin territory, something fascinating, new, and revolutionary, and then let's let the burden be on government to decide, you know, what things really have to have a regulatory role. Certainly something like health and safety, you'd want us to do something about protecting you from. But, you know, issues like whether a voice over IP service is going to have 911, whether law enforcement is going to be, you know, going to be frustrated in a way that would create vulnerabilities for our country. I mean, I'd rather work up that way and sort of have the burden being each additional regulation. Do we really need it? Why? And I think the biggest suspect should be, do you really need economic regulation? Do you really need me to set the terms and prices and conditions of that relationship? And so far, I think that you don't need that. You haven't needed that.
The states have been kind of debating whether to regulate voice over IP as telcos or as something new. What's your position on that?
Well, we're going to work through that, but I think that the impulse of some of the states is really wrong-headed. I think that it's a fallback to the familiar. You know, you hear things like, well, it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, so let's just regulate it like a duck. Well, maybe the ugly duckling is really a swan, and maybe you oughtn't jump so quickly to treat it like something you're familiar with. I think people need to understand, when you call it a telephone company, an enormous juggernaut of regulations fall in on the internet. All of a sudden, all your rates are supposed to be tariffed. All of a sudden, you get an automatic 10% tax. And all the state and local taxes, all of a sudden, you know, small Swift companies like Vonage, for example, will be wearing the right color badge that the PUC requires them to wear. Before we bury these guys with those kinds of obligations, I think we would be asking whether we really need them.
Yeah. So you'd like to see voice over IP just kind of blossom and find its own level, basically.
I think so. And I think, well, at a minimum, I think the regulators ought to step back and listen to technology, listen to what it's telling us about the prospects for our citizens in the future. And then where we really find demonstrable problems that we can clearly understand, and more importantly, that we really can postulate a solution for. Sometimes we see a problem, and so we say, well, let's regulate. But I think you ought to be sure you have a solution before you start entering into the territory and seizing control of something. And if we do, and it's defined enough, then we should act.
One of the technologies the Internet's really reliant on these days is wireless access. And of course, you completely control the airwaves. Currently, the Wi-Fi spectrum tends to be in an unregulated spectrum. Do you see that as an issue coming down the road? I mean, if I set up a Wi-Fi access point right now, I'm worried anybody could put anything on that spectrum.
You know what? I actually think it's one of the greatest opportunities to come along in a long time. You know, the FCC years ago tripped on this almost by accident. You know, this was spectrum people thought was junk.
Nobody wants it.
And so we said, oh, it's the spectrum of baby monitors and microwave radiation, so who cares? Unlicense it and send it out there. Funny thing happens when you give dreamers and entrepreneurs a platform to play with. People started inventing stuff, and they love the stuff that's being invented. And so now we realize it is a hotbed of innovation, one that we should, it's a beachhead we should drive, not retard. So recently we put out a bunch more spectrum for unlicensed. So for the moment, we'll watch out for whether we don't get meltdown or interference meltdown. But we think technology is learning how to cope with interference in a better way than law has always done. And so let's run with that for a while. Let's see how far we can go with that before we pull it back.
It proves your point. Unlicensed,
I think it proves our
open,
point.
That's where the innovation happens.
Well, you know, if you look at it, the areas in technology that are minimally regulated are the ones that are exploding. You know, the wireless industry is minimally regulated, and, you know, the handset industry, the Wi-Fi industry, it's just been exploding. Consumers have really jumped over to wireless technologies in a big way. Consumer electronic products. And if you go down the list, you'll really see, you know, the biggest investments, the biggest bets, the biggest risks are being taken by companies who know that they just got to satisfy the market and their shareholders and not the regulators.
I want to take a little break. When we come back, I want to talk about what is a hot button now in regulation, and I know one you're fighting over is digital television, the broadcast flag rules, HDTV, because that's one area where there is innovation happening, but there are also interests from the content providers. And they would like you to control it a little bit better. So we'll talk about that when we come back. Michael Powell is our guest, the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. We'll continue with him right after this. Stay here.